It is officially 2024, and with the turning of the new year, I think a lot of our minds mentally turn the page with regards to Pokemon, and now we're probably all really focused and excited about what is going to come next for the franchise, specifically in terms of what the next game for Pokemon in the main series is going to be. There's been a ton of speculation about this already, obviously, but in this video, I am going to give you guys my definitive prediction / best guess as to what I personally think the next new Pokemon game is going to be that is going to come out later this year. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so the quick TLDR on this topic is that first and foremost, there is most likely going to be a game this year in 2024, because there's pretty much a new main series Pokemon game every year, with the exception of years where we get DLC, which we obviously just did last year, so it's most likely the case that we're turning the page to a new game this year. Now the question becomes, what is that game going to be? There's obviously been a ton of talk about us getting a brand new Unova game, but also that discussion has become kind of cloudy with the release of the Indigo Disk DLC, and people aren't really as sure as they once were about whether or not that's actually going to happen. There's also been some talk about a possible Johto game that could potentially happen, but overall, now that we have pretty much all the info that we're going to get prior to this game's possible reveal, what do I think is going to happen? Well, it is my personal prediction and best guess and belief that we are going to get a future-based Unova game with terastallizing incorporated into it somehow in 2024. This would be along the lines of a Black and White 3, a possible Legends game that takes place in the future instead of the past, or a brand new completely separate Unova game that has new protagonists and everything. It could be a number of things, but I believe it's going to be based in Unova, it's going to feature terastallizing, and it's going to take place in the future compared to the original Unova games. Obviously, there's all the evidence that we've already talked about for a Unova game that comes from the original Unova games, Scarlet and Violet, and a number of other places, but despite all of the cloudiness that the Indigo Disk brought to this discussion, I still firmly believe that this is the most likely option for our next new game, and there's even some new evidence that I think makes this argument even more likely, which is what I'm going to talk about here. And the first piece of this additional evidence has to do with Briar. In the Teal Mask DLC, she accompanies you to the land of Kitakami, and upon visiting the crystal pools there, she makes the remark that she wants to bring the terrestrial phenomenon to other regions, and wants to allow it to reliably occur in other regions. This, to me, seems like it could be alluding to the fact that the terrestrial phenomenon is going to carry over into the next Gen 9 Pokemon game, where they're going to continue the idea of terastallization and the concept of using it as a central mechanic, similar to what we saw in Mega Evolution from X and Y to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And obviously the primary candidate for which region Briar could bring terastallization over to is Unova, because she's technically already done it. Now, you could say and make the argument that what Briar is referring to here is wanting to bring terastallization to Blueberry Academy in Unova, which we see later on in the Indigo Disk, but I believe it could also be a little bit bigger than that, because she says her ultimate goal is to make terastallization reliably occur in these other regions, which currently it is not doing in Unova, because the only place it exists that we know of is in Blueberry Academy in the Terrarium, which is a completely self-contained environment that's also completely artificial and cannot be construed as reliable at all in terms of the terastallization phenomenon occurring there. So I feel like the Indigo Disk in this respect is going to be a stepping stone to where we get it introduced in Unova, but then following all the events of the Indigo Disk, Briar takes that information and expands it to the greater Unova region. That is how I believe terastallizing appearing in this next Gen 9 game and region, which potentially is Unova, is going to be explained and justified, and honestly, that actually makes a lot of sense and would work really well. Additionally, there's also the idea that why would Blueberry Academy even be set in Unova if this wasn't the case? Because it's not like in the Indigo Disk DLC, we actually get to see anything that we know to be from Unova other than some Unova Pokemon. We don't see any of the actual Unova region itself, we don't see any characters that we know to be from Unova. It is completely detached and its own separate independent thing. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of Unova references and a lot of connections to Unova, but in terms of the actual Unova region and the characters and everything else, Blueberry Academy could very easily just be its own thing and would not at all have to be tied to Unova, and nothing would even really have to change about it, other than maybe the origins of some of the characters. So it's very independent and very much stands alone by itself, and isn't really relying on Unova as its own setting or anything like that. So with this being the case, why would Game Freak even put Blueberry Academy in Unova if it didn't mean anything or didn't have some greater purpose? It just doesn't make any sense, especially because Unova of all regions is a pretty random region at this time to just bring back and throw into Scarlet and Violet if it doesn't have some greater significance. And if a couple years down the line we end up finding out that some type of Unova game or follow-up did not end up happening, and this is truly just a random inclusion for the sake of the DLC in Blueberry Academy, in my personal opinion, it will easily be one of the most random and weird Game Freak creations that they have ever done, because it just makes no sense to have Unova as the theme here if we're not going to go to Unova, if we're not going to see any returning Unova characters, and if this isn't a stepping stone to a bigger Unova project. So I feel like even if there is a ton of Unova references and connections and things like that, that we're still going to be getting more Unova down the line, because I just feel like it just doesn't make enough sense if it's its own separate detached thing. And to be honest, you could even look at the Indigo Disk DLC as a telling of the events between Scarlet and Violet and this new Unova game that serves as an explanation of how the terrestrialization phenomenon is going to get in Unova. So it doesn't seem random when we finally get to that point, and it is present in those games, which also makes a lot of sense and is also, if that is indeed the case, a really cool way of using their DLC for Scarlet and Violet. I also believe that this is going to be a future-based game because of the whole Blueberry Academy Indigo Disk situation and the fact that it takes place in the future with not only regards to Scarlet and Violet, but more specifically the original Black and White games as well. And I also think there's a lot of credence to the idea that this sort of continues the themes and the ideas of Scarlet and Violet and Generation 9 with all of the time travel shenanigans. So I just think this makes for a perfect fit with regards to what Game Freak is trying to do in this generation. Another thing I think is very interesting with regards to this argument, and is admittedly completely circumstantial, but is worth bringing up, is the fact that 2024 is the year of the dragon in the Chinese zodiac. And with regards to Unova, this immediately brings to mind not only the box art legendary dragons of Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem, but also the original dragon, which is the fusion of all three of these Pokemon that everyone has been basically saying we have to see in a new Unova game if that happens. This obviously isn't going to be the reason why Game Freak comes out with this particular game in this particular year, but we also definitely can say that we know that Game Freak pays attention to this type of stuff as well, and it would totally be a Game Freak type of thing to release a new Unova game that potentially reveals that original Unova dragon in 2024, which is the year of the dragon. That not only seems extremely fitting, but it follows Game Freak's track record with the kind of things they like to do and their general behavior, so even if it is circumstantial, I think it's a point in the favor of this idea, even if it is a smaller one. And then the final piece of this discussion that kind of brings everything together here, and is honestly a significant point in my opinion with regards to everything kind of pointing towards Unova, is the anime. Obviously, earlier this year we got the debut of the brand new Pokemon Horizons anime, but the thing about this anime is that the storyline is entirely focused around Terapagos, at least at this current time frame, and it doesn't seem like the Terapagos focus is going to stop anytime soon. This is obviously happening to promote the Indigo Disk DLC and the latest generation of Pokemon in general, just like the anime has always done. However, the really weird thing about this is that Pokemon Horizons is not even going to premiere in the US until February 23rd of 2024, meaning that not only is it premiering well after the DLC's release, but it's also got to play catch up with all of those Terapagos focused episodes that the Japanese version has already had, and then it's going to continue on from there with even more of that Terapagos storyline, since as we said, it doesn't seem like it's going to conclude anytime soon. This indicates to me that Terapagos and the terastallizing that it is the source of more specifically is most likely going to continue to be relevant in some way going forward with the next games that we get in this generation, because the show has always been a promotion of the main series games and a reflection of what is going on in them. So if we are going to have this whole Terapagos terastallizing focus in the anime for the foreseeable future, I personally think that is a sign that it is not going anywhere in the games either, meaning that the next game we get is most likely going to feature it, and that, coupled with all of the Unova evidence that we've already talked about both in this video and in previous videos, personally tells me that we are most likely, or at least I believe, that we are going to get a new Unova game that features terastallizing come later this year and is probably going to be announced on Pokemon Day in late February. You might still be able to argue against it, and it might still not happen, and we could get a real curveball come February, but based on what we know now, based on what we can see, and based on everything that we have to observe and use as evidence, I believe that that is where the evidence is pointing us. And while I absolutely could be completely wrong, I would be legitimately surprised if it was just something completely different that didn't relate to this at all. But now that I have made my official prediction, I want to know what you guys think about this. Let me know your predictions and thoughts about my prediction in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more, because it really helps the video out. Also, if you'd like to further support the channel, be sure to check out my Pokemon remixes on Spotify, as well as other music streaming services, because that really helps out the channel too and is very much appreciated. And with that being said, I will be back with another new video very soon. And until then, as always, thanks so much for watching this one. I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.